Hello, you're watching AnewZ. I'm Dilek Tuna. Here are the top stories for the hour. Trump says he's very disappointed that India has been buying oil from Russia. Protesters clash with riot police after a demonstration in Serbia. The European Commission has fined Google €2.95 billion for breaching EU antitrust rules. US President Donald Trump has criticised India for purchasing large amounts of oil from Russia, calling the move very disappointing. Speaking from the Oval Office, Trump confirmed his administration has imposed a 50% tariff on Indian goods in response. He voiced clear disapproval of New Delhi's energy ties with Moscow, but insisted the US and India still share a very special relationship, despite what he called occasional moments of disagreement.
Is unbelievable. You know, I've been very disappointed that India would be buying so much oil, as you know, from Russia. And I let them know that. We put a very big tariff on India, 50% tariff, very high tariff.
And are you ready to reset relations with India at this point?
I always will. I'll always be friends with Modi. He's great. Prime Minister, he's great. I'll always be friends, but I just don't like what he's doing at this particular moment. But India and the United States have a special relationship. There's nothing to worry about. We just have moments on occasion.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that any Western troops in Ukraine would be considered legitimate military targets. This comes following Thursday's Coalition of the Willing meeting in Paris, where Kyiv's Western allies agreed on potential security guarantees for post-war Ukraine, including the deployment of a reassurance force. At the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok, Russian President Vladimir Putin has rejected Western security proposals for Ukraine, warning that any foreign troops deployed there would be treated as legitimate targets by Russia's military.
Regarding potential foreign military contingents in Ukraine, it is one of the root causes behind drawing Ukraine into NATO. Therefore, if some troops appear there, especially now during military operations, we proceed from the fact that these will be legitimate targets for destruction.
His warning followed a Paris summit of the Coalition of the Willing, where 26 nations pledged to provide troops once a ceasefire takes hold. The reassurance mission, led by France and the UK, is designed to strengthen Ukraine's security and stabilize the country in the event of a peace deal. But the Kremlin is dismissing it. Putin claims foreign forces would block peace, while his spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, branded the Paris plan definitely not acceptable, saying NATO or allied troops near Russia's border would be seen as a threat. The Paris summit, hosted by Emmanuel Macron with Volodymyr Zelenskyy in attendance, underlined Europe's push to act independently. Zelenskyy welcomed the decision as the first concrete step towards real security guarantees. Macron stressed the mission would not fight Russia, but prevent any fresh assault on Ukraine. The United States, however, has yet to define its role. US President Donald Trump has ruled out putting troops on the ground, but suggested air support could be possible. Despite recent contacts between Trump and Putin, talks with Ukraine have stalled. Putin insists he has an open dialogue with Trump and says he is ready to host a summit in Moscow. For Kyiv, the stakes remain high. Ukrainian officials point to Moscow's repeated breaches of past agreements and say only binding Western protection can prevent another cycle of attacks. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Kyiv will continue striking back against Russian energy targets, even as neighbouring countries face fallout. Speaking after talks with Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico in Uzhhorod, Zelenskyy defended Ukraine's actions, stressing Russia has bombarded Ukrainian power facilities for years. Slovakia and Hungary, still reliant on Russian oil and gas, have seen disruptions in supplies through the Druzhba pipeline following recent Ukrainian attacks.
Fico, who has criticised Ukraine's energy policies in the past, warned such strikes also hurt his country.
I phoned with him.
There is no alternative to peace, and we support it. This war has to end. Russia must stop the war, as they are the only party that started it and unfortunately continues to drag it out. We count on support for our peace efforts. Ukraine responds to Russia's attacks on our energy facilities and will keep doing so. But we really want this war to end. However, no one is going to just sit in the dark and tolerate it. We are open to joint projects in the energy sector and remain open to supplying Slovakia with oil and gas, unless, as I made clear to the Prime Minister, the gas and oil comes from Russia, because we are at war, period.
We
respect how countries protect their national interests, but at the same time, we should also respect the interests of others. We discussed with Vladimir Putin the issue of attacks on oil infrastructure on the territory of the Russian Federation. We also discussed the fact that Russia is no longer able to transport energy to Slovakia. As you know, this has led to strong political statements on both sides. I have spoken about the losses incurred by Slovakia.
And joining us now to discuss the latest developments on the war in Ukraine is journalist and political analyst Nikola Mikovic. Nikola, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, President Putin has suggested that he'd be prepared to meet President Zelenskyy, but only on home soil in Moscow. What do you think is behind this?
I don't think Zelenskyy will ever agree to come to Moscow, just like Putin will never agree to come to Kiev. So if they ever meet, that will have to be somewhere else, in Turkey or Kazakhstan, in the United States even, but not in Russia or in Ukraine. But even if they meet, I don't think they will sign a peace agreement because they don't see each other as legitimate leaders. So I think this Putin's rhetoric is just another charade. He is creating an illusion that he's willing to hold talks with Ukraine and with the West, but in reality, I don't think any of the involved parties is willing to really negotiate, because it's impossible to reach peace under the current circumstances where no side has achieved a clear victory on the battlefield. So we are still very far from peace, and even if Putin and Zelenskyy would meet, it will be just another charade, I'm afraid.
Mm-hmm. So even Putin's suggesting that he'll only meet him on Russian soil, knowing that Zelenskyy won't come, as you pointed out, is just another show of him unwilling to talk and come to the table, I suppose.
Well, I think they're both willing to talk, but nothing more than that. They're just empty talks, because there are no conditions to reach a ceasefire agreement, let alone a lasting peace, because Russia did not achieve any of its goals in Ukraine. And let me just remind your viewers, there are 6 goals that Russia declared in February of 2022. Some of them are the so-called denazification, demilitarization of Ukraine, Ukraine de facto and de jure recognition of Russia's annexation of the Crimea and the Donbass, and also Ukraine will have to agree on neutral status, no NATO membership. Kiev is not willing to accept any of those demands, which means that it's impossible to reach a compromise, and the war will have to go on until one of the two involved parties suffers a defeat on the battlefield, and I think we're still far from such an outcome. Now, that does not mean that they will not hold talks and maybe reach a local ceasefire or something like that, but to reach a lasting peace, one of the two parties will have to de facto surrender, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. Still, the US President Donald Trump is pressuring both Moscow and Kiev to hold talks, because it is Trump who wants to portray himself as a peacemaker. So from his perspective, it would make sense that Putin and Zelenskyy meet somewhere and talk, and then he could say, look what I achieved. The two enemies, they decided to meet and to negotiate peace and so on. That would be a great move from his perspective, and his voters would support it. So it is possible that they will eventually meet, even though they don't see each other as legitimate leaders, but that tells you a lot about them, because how could you negotiate with someone who you don't recognize, right? So I think it's impossible to reach a peace agreement under the current circumstances, even if they eventually meet.
Nicola, on that note, what about a meeting between Putin, Zelensky and Trump? How likely is it that could still take place, do you think?
Well, it is possible that they will eventually hold separate talks, Putin and Trump and Zelensky and Trump, and then maybe Trump will manage to force them to talk to each other. Although I think Zelensky would use it to create some kind of a show, as he did when he met with Trump for the first time in the White House. I don't think Putin is ready for that, because Putin never participated in any debates, public debates, because he's not a politician in reality. He never had a political party. He was never a leader of any political movements. He was a typical bureaucrat. Even before he came to power, he just worked as a typical KGB apparatchik. So I don't think he has any experience in debating with his political opponents. Zelensky could use it and humiliate Putin publicly, but Putin and his team, they're quite aware of that, which is why I don't think that they are willing to accept to talk to Zelensky under such circumstances. And that's why Sergei Lavrov and other Russian officials insist that they should hold talks behind closed doors, because I think they want to avoid any public humiliation.
And Nicola, lastly, this all comes as the EU is sending a delegation to the United States to prepare joint sanctions on Russia. How hopeful are you that more sanctions could make a difference?
Well, they will continue imposing sanctions on the Russian Federation, and as we can see, the United States is now pressuring the European countries to stop purchasing Russian energy, and I think eventually they will have to stop importing oil and gas from Russia. Most of them already stopped doing that, although they continue buying it indirectly. But as we can see, the energy flows are switching towards the east, which means that Russia is exporting its oil and gas to countries such as China and India, which could have an impact on European economies. But those sanctions that the West is imposing on Russia, they're part of the West's long-term strategy, I think, to create a serious damage in the Russian economy and to force Russia to make concessions to the West. I think that's the whole point of those sanctions, and also to switch energy flows to the east. In the past, Russia was helping the German economy by providing it with a relatively cheap natural gas, and now it will do the same to China. So it will sell relatively cheap Russian gas to China, while Germany and other European countries will have to find an alternative to Russian energy, which could be pretty difficult because prices from other producers have like US-based companies, they sell LNG to Europe at very high prices. So that will have an impact on European economies, but that does not mean that they will give up on their ambitions to end their dependence on Russian gas. So sanctions will be there, and they will continue imposing sanctions.
Okay, Nicola, thank you. It's a pleasure talking to you today. I appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
Thousands of anti-government protesters gathered in Novi Sad, leading to clashes with riot police. Protesters joined a demonstration to demand elections. Police used tear gas and stun grenades to disperse the protesters in the area around the city's university campus. The protests began in response to the tragedy in November 2024, when 16 people were killed in a train station roof collapse. Demonstrators are blaming corruption for the disaster and are calling for those responsible to be held accountable. Over in France, ahead of a no-confidence vote set for Monday over Prime Minister François Bayroul's proposed budget bill and spending cuts, polls indicate that 2/3 of voters oppose his austerity plan. Political commentators expect Bayroul's government to fall. For more on what's at stake for France, we go to our Anita Sharma and her segment This Day in Europe.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where France veers toward a political and financial crisis as Prime Minister François Bayrou faces a high-stakes no-confidence vote Monday. Tied to the controversial €44 billion austerity package, the showdown threatens to collapse the French government. It comes just days before a crucial credit rating review by global credit rating agency Fitch, which could send shockwaves through international markets. Bayrou's proposed spending cuts are designed to rein in France's ballooning deficit. They include reducing public holidays, raising out-of-pocket medical costs, and tightening pension thresholds. But with no parliamentary majority and growing opposition within his own centrist alliance, Bayrou's grip on power is slipping fast. Political observers say his chances of surviving the vote are slim, and a failure would make him the second prime minister to fall in under a year. Public backlash is growing too. Recent polls suggest nearly two-thirds of French voters oppose the austerity plan, and street protests have gathered momentum in cities from Marseille to Paris. On September 12th, Fitch Ratings will release its latest review of France's sovereign credit score, which is currently AA- with a negative outlook. If the government fails the confidence vote, the message, little or no support for fiscal austerity, could prompt Fitch to cut its rating down to A+ and pave the way for other agencies such as Moody's and S&P Global to follow suit. Downgrades would be a severe blow, especially with France's public debt expected to exceed 118% of GDP by next year. The markets have been reacting, with 10-year French bond yields recently hitting their highest spread over German bunds since April. France is not the only European country dealing with significant debt issues, but given that it's the second largest economy, analysts warn a downgrade could trigger a broader investor pullback, raising borrowing costs and weakening France's position in the Eurozone. France plays a pivotal role in European financial stability, so any erosion of investor confidence in Paris could ripple through the broader bloc, testing everything from ECB policy credibility to the resilience of EU-wide fiscal rules. Earlier this week, ECB President Christine Lagarde warned that the collapse of a Eurozone government would be, quote, worrying. With Bayrou's political future hanging by a thread and a credit downgrade looming on the horizon, France finds itself at a dangerous intersection where fiscal credibility, political leadership, and investor trust converge. Next week could prove decisive, not just for France, but also for the Eurozone's financial reputation. For AnewZ, I'm Anita Sharma, reporting from Arnhem, Netherlands.
The European Union has fined Google nearly €3 billion over anti-competitive practices in digital advertising. The company now has 60 days to end the conduct or face tougher remedies.
The European Commission has imposed a €2.95 billion penalty on Google, accusing the company of abusing its dominance in the online advertising technology sector. Regulators say the conduct distorted Europe's digital advertising market since 2014, forcing publishers and advertisers to rely on Google's systems. Google now has 60 days to present a plan to end these practices, while regulators continue to weigh stronger remedies, including a potential breakup of some services. The tech giant has rejected the ruling, calling it unjustified, and announced plans to appeal. Executives warned the changes could hurt thousands of European businesses that depend on online advertising revenues. This is the fourth major antitrust case Google has faced in Brussels in under a decade, adding to previous multi-billion euro penalties. But the timing of the fine is politically sensitive. Brussels initially delayed the fine out of concern it could disrupt a fragile EU-US trade deal, which still faces hurdles over tariffs on European cars. In Washington, President Donald Trump denounced the decision, describing it as part of a broader campaign against American tech companies.
We're upset with the European Union because of what's happening with not just Google, but with all of our big companies. They just, hit them with these unbelievable fines, $17 billion and $14 billion. And they use that money to run Europe. It's almost become like common. It's almost become a yearly occurrence, like it's a tax.
He pointed to past actions against Apple and Google, claiming the fines amounted to tens of billions of dollars and signaled a broader pattern against US companies. Trump warned that Washington should respond in kind if European regulators continue this approach.
Azerbaijan has called Russia's latest statement on the Azerbaijan Airlines plane crash both surprising and misleading. Officials stress that insurance payments to Azal and its passengers by a Russian company were made months ago, strictly under the airline's insurance contract. They said it cannot be matched with the compensation demanded from the Russian government for the downing of the aircraft. Baku also dismissed Moscow's claim that the arrest of 13 Russian citizens in July caused tensions. It says bilateral relations deteriorated after the crash itself, the conduct of Russian officials, and incidents of persecution against Azerbaijanis in Russia. Now, to unpack this development, we're joined by Dr. Patrick Walsh, historian and political analyst from Belfast, UK. Welcome to the program, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you very much. Nice to be on the program.
Thank you. Now, how significant is this disagreement over insurance payments in the broader context of Azerbaijan-Russia relations?
Well, it signifies Russia's attitude, really, which has been pretty, let's say, on one side, minimalist or derisory on another side. Obviously, Russia is intending to play hardball with Azerbaijan and create a deterioration in relations. It has not been sensitive. It's been disrespectful, really, essentially, to Azerbaijan. So it obviously has a political intention behind this stance, because it isn't the former stance of Russia that pertained in the last few years. So there must be some reason behind this. I would probably locate the reason behind this being to do with the agreement fostered by President Trump, and I think Russia is displeased with this American intervention in the South Caucasus, and it's showing its displeasure through various methods against Azerbaijan at present.
Okay. And both sides have raised concerns, from the downing of the Azal plane to the arrests of citizens. How do these issues shape current bilateral ties?
Well, the downing of the Azal plane is essentially the pivotal moment of deterioration in relations. I think all the other events that have occurred subsequently have come from this. This is the original deterioration of relations. So I think, all the other events like the arrest and killing of Azerbaijanis in Russia, plus the response that the Azerbaijan government has taken to this in relation to Russians in Baku, I think this all flows from this original incident, and essentially Russia's failure to give an adequate response to what they did. And it was a provocation in a lot of respects, the deaths of so many innocent civilians, and it wasn't apologized for in an adequate manner. And obviously compensation has not been offered in an inadequate manner either. It's been very inadequate and very insensitive from Moscow's point of view.
So, looking forward, Mr. Walsh, what steps could help ease tensions and restore constructive dialogue between Azerbaijan and Russia? Because I know earlier you said Russia's planning to play hardball. So, are they okay with losing Azerbaijan in a sense?
I don't think this is the case. I don't think they're prepared to lose Azerbaijan. I think what's happening at the present minute is there is a deterioration of relationship, but it's actually kept within bounds. It's being, in some ways, it's in the interests of both governments in Baku and Moscow to maintain this deterioration of relations, but within limits. And I think the reason for this is Russia is in a highly nationalistic mood at the present minute, mainly to do with the Ukrainian war. Putin is under pressure from nationalists who basically want to, who project him as weak in relation to the South Caucasus and want him to play hard against both Armenia and Azerbaijan. and Georgia as well. And from the other point of view, Baku has suffered this insensitivity from Russia, and it has to let the Russians know that they need to respect Azerbaijan more. So what we're seeing, in essence, is a type of limited deterioration, but it won't go any further, I don't think. And the reason for that is because of all the developments that are occurring within Eurasia, all the developments connected to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, all the economic developments, the peace process. Really, all these states are now involved in a very interconnected web of relationships in which finding solutions, finding settlements, finding functional agreements is an imperative for the future. So I don't see relations going much worse. It is not in the interest of either Moscow or Baku for them to go much worse. So I think they're being kept within bounds. This suits both governments at the present moment, but I could foresee in the future relations being smoothed out, and there'll probably be recompense of some former of further methods in the future. So I'm optimistic in that respect. I don't think we should be too pessimistic. I think there may be a resolution to this in the future after a certain period is over.
Okay. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Mr. Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure entirely.
The delegations of Azerbaijan and Armenia conducted mutual visits on Friday to the territories of Azerbaijan and Armenia, led by Deputy Prime Minister Shahin Mustafayev and Mayor Grigoryan. The talks focused on coordinating efforts for broader delimitation and demining, as well as restoring and building necessary infrastructure. The sides also discussed timelines for implementation and exchanged views on organising the next meetings of their respective joint border commissions. A new Gallup poll shows nearly 60% of Armenians oppose creating the Trump route, a major transport link seen as key for promoting peace and stability in the region.
Around 60% of Armenian citizens oppose the Trump route for international peace and prosperity, a strategic transit corridor connecting mainland Azerbaijan with its Nakhchivan exclave through Armenian territory. That's according to a Gallup International poll presented by the organization's Armenian representative, Aram Navasardian. The survey, conducted in late August with more than 1,100 participants, revealed divided public opinion. Nearly 48% said they were completely against the plan, while 11% leaned negative. In contrast, 18% said they were somewhat supportive and 17% fully backed it. About 6% were undecided. Despite public resistance, regional leaders have already moved forward. The long-awaited agreement on the establishment of peace and interstate relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia was formally initialed on August 8th in Washington, when the presidents of both countries signed a joint declaration witnessed by US President Donald Trump. The text of the agreement was made public on August 11th. The deal grants the United States exclusive rights for 99 years to develop what is officially called the Trump route for international peace and prosperity. More than just a transport link, the Trump route represents a major step toward lasting peace and stability in the region. The project is expected to boost trade, improve mobility, and strengthen cooperation between both countries, marking a historic milestone in efforts to normalize relations and secure long-term regional stability.
Georgia's European future is once again at the centre of a heated debate. As Brussels raises questions about visa-free travel, Tbilisi pushes back. Meanwhile, the polls show a public strongly committed to the European Union path, but divided on who bears responsibility for tensions. Our Nini Nikolashvili reports from Tbilisi.
Georgia's domestic politics are once again spilling over into its foreign relations, this time in the heated debate over the country's path toward Europe. Speaking about the possibility of Brussels suspending visa-free travel, Parliament Speaker Shalva Paposhvili pushed back sharply. He said that Brussels is not a court and cannot be a court, arguing that questions about justice in Georgia should be decided at home, not abroad. Babashvili defended the country's legal system, insisting it operates at a high level, pointing to acquittals in recent verdicts and claiming Georgia even outranks some EU states in areas such as corruption and rule of law. He also accused certain European officials of bias and double standards, pointing to what he described as brutal dispersals of protests in cities like Berlin and Paris. But while government officials frame criticism from Brussels as unfair, public opinion inside Georgia tells a more complicated story. A new CRRC survey shows that if visa-free travel were suspended, more than half of Georgians would blame the ruling Georgian Dream Party and its founder, Bidina Ivanishvili. Only a small fraction would hold the EU responsible. And despite political tensions, support for European Union membership remains overwhelming. Nearly 80% of Georgians say that they back joining the bloc, with the highest support among young people. The result is a widening gap. On one side, government leaders portraying Brussels as overreaching, and on the other, a public that continues to see its future firmly in Europe. This tension raises the core question. In Georgia today, is backing the EU the same as opposing the ruling party, or has foreign policy become hostage to the battles of domestic politics? It's Nini Nikolaishvili reporting from Tbilisi, AnewZ.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met with EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas in Qatar to discuss the latest developments regarding Iran's nuclear program and the ways to advance a diplomatic settlement.
Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi discussed bilateral relations and regional developments with the Emir of Qatar, Tamim Al Thani, Tehran's nuclear program with the EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas, as well as the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza with the Deputy Chairman of Political Bureau of the ruling Palestinian group Khalil al-Hayya during a one-day visit to the neighboring Persian Gulf state of Qatar. According to the official Qatari news agency Qana, Araghchi conveyed the verbal message of the Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian to Emir of Qatar on expansion of bilateral ties and issues of common concern, particularly the regional developments. Also, Iran's official IRNA news agency reported that Araghchi met with Kaja Kallas, during which the latest developments related to Iran's nuclear issue, especially the move by 3 European countries, France, Germany and the UK, to restore the repealed UN Security Council resolutions were discussed. Quoting a foreign ministry press release, the report said that Iran's top diplomat and the EU foreign policy chief further exchanged views on the interaction between Tehran and the International Atomic Energy Agency IAEA, which was suspended following the war on Iran's civilian nuclear sites last June. Local media quoted Iran's ambassador to the United Nations office in Vienna, Reza Najafi, saying that Tehran and IAEA held expert-level talks today discussing the new bilateral cooperation modality. During his stay in Doha, Araghchi also met with a high-ranking delegation of the Palestinian group Hamas, led by Khalil al-Hayya. According to the Press TV, affiliated to Iran's state IRIB broadcasting organization, the Iranian foreign minister reaffirmed Tehran's commitment to supporting the Palestinian people's legitimate resistance against Israeli occupation until their rights are fully restored. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting for AnewZ TV, Tehran.
As Afghanistan reels from the series of quakes, the death toll continues to climb, and the world is rushing to send aid. Our Tamim Bahis has more in Kabul.
Deputy government spokesman Hamdullah Fitrat says the death toll from the powerful quake in Kunar province has now reached 2,200 people, with more than 3,600 injured. The international community is rushing to respond. UNICEF confirmed the arrival of the first shipment of European Union aid in Kabul today. 130 tons of tents, medical equipment and clothing. A second shipment is expected tomorrow. Japan has also delivered emergency relief, including tents and blankets handed over to the Red Cross and Red Crescent societies. Japan's embassy says the supplies will be distributed to survivors in the eastern provinces and pledged continued support. Meanwhile, Ireland has allocated €500,000 through the International Federation of the Red Cross to provide food, clean water and healthcare. Australia has announced $1 million in aid through the United Nations Afghanistan Humanitarian Fund. Russia has dispatched 20 metric tons of food supplies under the directive of President Vladimir Putin, and Turkmenistan has pledged food, shelter and medical assistance following a call between its foreign minister and Afghan official. In addition, Iran has expressed readiness to provide humanitarian support, with Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi offering condolences and solidarity during a phone conversation with his Afghan counterpart. As relief continues to arrive, officials warn that the humanitarian needs remain overwhelming in the wake of one of the deadliest disasters to strike Afghanistan in years. This is Tamim Bahis in Kabul for AnewZ.
You're up to date with world news for the hour. Stay tuned to AnewZ for more updates.